Ever looked at something, maybe your own routine or a business or even a whole field of science, and wondered why it just suddenly changes after ages of being stable?
Yeah, or why those really big shifts, in markets or society often feel so unpredictable, like they just spring out of nowhere.
Exactly. We tend to see these moments of emergence as, well, almost magical, a bit mysterious.
But what if they aren't? What if those seemingly spontaneous transformations, those unpredictable leaps, are actually underpinned by a specific logic, a sort of calculable process?
That is precisely what we are unpacking today. We're diving into emergence modeling. It's from Chapter 9 of Louise von Baumgarten's book, The Abstractionists' Papers.
Which, it's worth mentioning, is actually available for free online.
Oh, right. Good point. You can find it at welcometothe.bluespace.com if you want to go deeper after this.
Yeah. So our goal today is really to kind of pull back the curtain on the hidden calculations behind all this. How systems decide, well, whether to stay with what they know or go towards something totally new.
It's about turning that feeling of chaos into something potentially measurable. A threshold problem, really. Giving you tools to understand, maybe even anticipate, change.
Okay, let's get into it.
So the core idea, the big premise here, is pretty fascinating. The book suggests that natural processes don't just, react. They actively choose when to ditch their current state.
Right, and then reorganize at a higher level. It's not just random adaptation. It feels more like an internal, almost strategic calculation in response to disruptions.
Actively choose is strong. How does that work? Is it like a conscious choice? Or something else? And what does reorganize at a higher level mean practically? Like for a company?
Good questions. No, it's not conscious like we think of consciousness. It's more like an ongoing internal evaluation. Processes are constantly weighing the cost, the effort of just maintaining things as they are
Okay.
versus the cost and potential benefit of a complete overhaul, a total reorganization. It's like an economic assessment happening under the hood.
I see. An economic assessment.
Exactly. And reorganizing at a higher level.
Mm.
For a business, yeah, it could be a major strategy shift, a whole new product line. For an ecosystem, maybe a new stable state after, say, a fire or something.
So it's this fundamental question, should I stay or should I go? That's the core dilemma driving emergence.
That's exactly how the book puts it. It's that tipping point where sticking with the status quo just becomes more costly, more difficult than making the leap to transform.
All right, so if they're choosing, what's the actual mechanism? How does this internal decision happen? The book introduces this really key concept called impedance.
Impedance. Think of it like a system's internal resistance or maybe enthusiasm for applying its own rules. Every process has rules, right? But impedance dictates how strongly or weakly those rules get applied.
Okay, so it's like a dial on the rule.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Let's say impedance Z is 1.0. The rule works as expected. Standard outcome.
Right.
But if Z drops below 1.0, the system offers less resistance. It's like greasing the wheels. The rule's effect gets amplified, maybe dramatically.
And if it goes above 1.0,
Then there's more resistance. The book even calls it immunity sometimes. The rule's effect gets dampened, maybe significantly.
wow, okay. So the intensity changes. What does that mean overall? Does it mean that what looks like a fundamental change in rules might just be the system tweaking this internal resistance?
That's the really mind-bending part. Yes. It suggests the system isn't just following rules blindly, it's actively modulating them through impedance.
So the same rule can have wildly different effects.
Exactly. Which creates a lot of the apparent unpredictability we see.
Yeah.
It's not always a new rule, just the old rule meeting different levels of resistance or, support.
Mm.
And this leads to what the book calls a continuous optimization challenge. Processes are sort of always asking, stick with the current impedance settings, the current way of doing things, or is it time to invest energy, resources into a reorganization?
To find new settings, new configurations that might work better.
Precisely. Configurations that might lead to more viable, more efficient outcomes. That strategic choice, driven by this internal efficiency calculation, is fundamental to how rules themselves seem to emerge or fade away.
This internal tuning is fascinating. But systems don't just change internally, right? Something has to trigger it from outside. How does a process even know a change is needed?
Right. There has to be a trigger. The book makes a really important distinction here. It says external disruptions, like a sudden market crash or a new scientific finding, they operate in a different dimension almost from the system's internal state.
Different dimensions, like frequency versus time, sort of, independent but influencing each other.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. They're separate axes, but they definitely affect each other. And external disruption creates signals out there in the environment. But here's the key. The process has to be able to interpret those signals.
Interpret them.
This is where the concept of affordances comes in. An affordance is basically the process's capacity, its internal setup, its readiness to even pick up on a signal and make sense of it in a useful way.
So if a system lacks the right affordances, it might just miss the signal entirely.
Exactly, or misinterpret it. A huge event for one system might be completely invisible, just background noise, to another system that isn't equipped to perceive or understand it.
That really underlines how subjective this can be. It's not just what happens externally, but what the system can actually register and process internally.
Precisely. It's the interaction between the event and the system's internal capacity. That's why different systems react so differently to the same disruption. Some adapt, some collapse, some don't even seem to notice.
Okay, this leads us to the core of the model then, this idea of the rational reorganizer. Processes aren't just reacting randomly, they're calculating.
Yes, constantly calculating in a sense. Is the total cost of staying like this outweighing the cost of reorganizing? It's an economic decision happening at a really fundamental level, even without consciousness as we know it.
Let's break down those costs. This is where the model gets quite specific, doesn't it? The cost of staying.
Right. It mainly involves two things. First, there's the maintenance cost, Mount Fortuna, just the basic cost of keeping things running as they are.
Okay.
And the model shows if a system gets pushed to extremes, like really high or low impedance or very high attachment to its current state.
Attachment meaning how deeply ingrained its ways are.
Yes, sort of how committed it is. If it's at those extremes, maintenance gets increasingly expensive, especially if there are ongoing disruptions from the environment. And it doesn't just increase linearly, it accelerates.
So the worse things get, the faster the cost of just maintaining that state goes up.
Exactly. Then on top of that, there are adjustment costs. These are the costs of making small local tweaks, trying to adjust impedance a bit or attachment.
Like trying to fine-tune an old, creaky machine.
That's a great way to put it. It gets harder and more costly to make small changes if the system is already strained or deeply set in its ways. These costs shoot up when you're trying to adjust from those extreme starting points.
Okay, so that's the cost of staying. What's the other side?
The other side is the cost of strategic reorganization, R. This is the one-time big cost of a complete overhaul. Demolishing the old ways, building the new structure, integrating everything.
And the core decision rule is, well, pretty straightforward.
Elegantly simple, yeah. If the total cost of staying sane climbs higher than the cost of reorganization, R, then the process reorganizes. It flips.
It crosses a threshold.
Precisely. The book even has this little toy simulation that shows it clearly. As the gap grows, the difference between what the system perceives and what it expects based on its current setup, that cumulative cost of staying, say, just keeps rising.
Rising faster and faster.
Exactly. It accelerates until inevitably it hits that point where reorganization is just the cheaper, more economically sensible option. It's a predictable tipping point mathematically.
So pulling this all together, what's the big picture here? What does this mean for how we look at the world?
I think the really big takeaway is that emergence stops seeming so mysterious.
Yeah.
This model frames it not as some magical property, but as a calculable thing, a measurable threshold problem.
Right. It positions these processes, whether they're cells or markets or ideas, as kind of rational reorganizers, constantly doing this cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, rational in an optimizing sense, always calculating the best time to transform based on this economic choice.
Yeah.
Maintain or overhaul. It gives us a new lens, new tools maybe, for predicting or even managing transformations.
The book mentions some real-world examples, like GameStop or climate science. How do they fit?
They illustrate the principle, yeah. With GameStop, you could argue the cost of staying. For those holding short positions, maintaining that bet against the stock grew exponentially due to mounting losses and margin calls. Eventually, that cost exceeded the cost of reorganization, which meant closing those positions, forcing a market shift.
Ah, okay. And climate science.
Similar logic, different context. For a long time, the scientific community might resist a major paradigm shift. The cost of reorganization, changing textbooks, theories, reputations is high. But as contradictory evidence piles up, the gap grows. The cost of staying with the old model in terms of explanatory power and credibility eventually crosses a threshold. Reorganizing around a new consensus becomes the more scientifically viable path.
So vastly different situations, but the underlying economic logic, stay versus go, is the same.
That's the core idea. Processes build up strain, often by adjusting resistance or impedance, until that reorganization just becomes the most efficient, the most economical move. Rules don't just exist, they emerge because applying them in certain ways becomes more efficient than others.
Emergence as a strategic choice about efficiency. Wow.
It really is a fresh way to think about it, isn't it? The next time you see some big shift happening, technology, society, maybe even something personal.
Yeah. You can look at it differently, not just as, wow, they came out of nowhere, but maybe, okay, what costs were building up? What threshold just got crossed?
Exactly. It's this idea that processes are constantly doing this internal accounting, weighing the costs of staying put against the potential costs and benefits of a radical change. It shifts you from just observing to thinking about the dynamics underneath.
It definitely makes you wonder, what impedance am I dealing with right now? In my work, in my life? What things am I attached to where the maintenance cost is secretly climbing?
And what hidden calculations might be pushing towards the next big change? Either one that's coming at you, or maybe one you need to initiate yourself.
It feels very practical, actually, not just theory, a tool for spotting or maybe even guiding change.
I think so. It provides a framework for thinking about how to potentially design conditions that might favor beneficial emergence.
Well, we really hope this deep dive gave you one of those aha moments. And seriously, do check out the Abstractionist papers by Louise von Baumgarten. Again, it's free at welcometothe.bluespace.com.
It's definitely worth exploring further.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep digging deep, keep asking questions, and keep making those vital connections.